Hello everyone, this is Poohhead189, and today we're going to be discussing a big misconception in Warhammer 40k. Not only with the general public, but even so-called seasoned 40k fans, they don't really seem to understand this concept. You see, Warhammer 40,000 tends to be seen as the ultimate piece of grimdark fiction. The popular take is that if you were to be transported to the 40k universe, you would have a horrible life no matter where you landed, if you could even live at all. This is an extremely casual view of the setting that really exposes how little you know of the 40k universe. Now, in the 40k universe, the general lore is that the Imperium of Man consists of about 1 million worlds, give or take a few thousand. While the other factions are big, humanity owns most of the Milky Way galaxy, because Warhammer 40k is supposed to portray the peak of human civilization having begun to degrade over thousands of years. However, humanity still is the largest civilization, and while yes, ask anyone, a lot of the galaxy is pretty hostile to humans, of course there's many people who are living in squalor or being killed fighting eldritch abominations or being tortured or sacrificed. However, that is not the majority of the human experience. Both logically and narratively, it can't be. The reason it can't be logically is because a civilization cannot subsist, even in decline, on nothing but abject suffering. Even when, let's say, slavery was legal, let's say in America, if it was the majority of the population, that would have ended very quickly. The reason why it didn't is because it was a small portion of the population that suffered greatly. Now, it also cannot work narratively, because if everything is grimdark, you can't appreciate the truly dark moments. With a Black Library novel character, they need to see some light in order to be truly scared of the alien or the demon, or even human adversaries. And then you also need to realize that while grimdark is a term coined by Games Workshop and Warhammer, it didn't even start with Warhammer 40k. It started with fantasy, and there's a good argument to be made that fantasy is even more grimdark than 40k. However, let's not get into that, let's get into the specifics of this video. Since we've all seen those memes of, if you were transported to the last video game you've played or book you've read, how fucked are you? Here's why Warhammer 40k might not be as bad as many say. While it's true many people in the 40k universe live happy lives, we should define happiness. Some people are happy doing one thing, and others are happy doing another. Some people truly are happy doing constant work. My grandfather worked as a mechanic for 50 years, then after he was forced to retire, for the next 10 years he walked back to the mechanic shop and worked for free, while not technically a part of the staff. So happiness isn't necessarily being pampered. However, there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of aristocracy or the ludicrously wealthy merchants in 40k, and all of these people have their every whim catered to. Now, we could count them in this, some people truly are just born lucky in nobility, but for fairness' sake, let's not include them. So let's describe happiness as having the opportunity for a good quality of life. How about that? That sounds adequate. Let's also not count the Adeptus Mechanicus or the Adeptus Astartes, because even though they are usually quite content with their lives, one could argue that is due to indoctrination, so let's just go with the average human. Okay, so even with all of the caveats, if you were to be transported to the 40k universe, you would actually have a fairly good chance of landing somewhere that is not hostile to your life. In the galaxy, there are a few dozen different types of planets one may find. These classifications are generally made to denote what purpose the planet serves to the Imperium and how it conducts itself. One of these are the hive worlds. Now, a hive world is a planet that is usually a huge wasteland, but on various points of the planet, there are hive cities. Hive cities are huge spires that consist of billions of men and women all living in a single vast structure. Usually the poorer you are, the lower you live, and the richer you are, the higher you live. Now, I know what you're thinking, A hive world is not a great place to live in general, everyone knows this. However, that is mostly only true for the lower hive and the underhive. Now, I'm not even going to count the nobility in the upper hive. What people never think about is that in every hive city, there are millions that live in the middle hive as well-to-do middle-class people who work regular jobs, get married, have kids, eat cake, even go on small vacations to other parts of the hive, etc. Unless something collapses or, mutants attack from the underhive, and that is generally very rare, they live regular lives of relative happiness. One could also make the argument that a cardinal world owned by the ecclesiarchy is a nice place to live. Sure, you live under the strict hierarchy of the imperial creed. However, there is rarely a time where you lack a meal, or a place to sleep, or employment, or a purpose for your life. One could easily say most people there are happy. However, the hives and the cardinal worlds pale in comparison to three types of worlds where you are guaranteed to have a pretty standard, if not exemplary, life. The first are what we call civilized worlds. These worlds, while they may differ in climate and ecology, are very similar to modern-day Earth. They have cities, suburbs, roads, vacation spots, fresh water, and are usually well run, and almost always are they in the Goldilocks zone of their solar system. They are entire planets that live like we who live in the first world do, and sometimes they live even better, with better technology and opportunities of life. While someone on one end of the galaxy is getting his face torn off by a tyrannid, on the other side of the galaxy, there are Little League baseball teams being played by a bunch of kids on a cul-de-sac with parents that work regular jobs and kiss their children goodnight. You, the listener of this video, could easily be living in a civilized world right now, on your computer or phone, and decide to go out for some Wendy's to treat yourself. There's thousands of civilized worlds in the Imperium of Man. And of course, as long as they pay the imperial tithe, which could be just basic resources or some recruits for the Imperial Guard, they can go on living like that for the rest of time. Beyond them, however, are what we call garden worlds and pleasure worlds. Sometimes people use both terms interchangeably, but there is a slight distinction. A garden world is supposed to be much like Earth before industrialization, or something like what one would imagine to be like Eden. They don't have to have both cold and warm climates. It could just be a whole big forest, but usually these worlds are held for their natural beauty, untarnished and used for vacation spots for the rich. However, while the rich do visit, there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions, maybe even tens of millions, of locals who live on each of these worlds. While they might not be pampered 24/7, they live idyllic lives with plenty of room and fresh air. Imagine an entire planet that looks like a painting, with large cabins and horses and lakes. And to go to pleasure worlds, they are much the same, except for a small difference. While pleasure worlds do sometimes have natural beauty, they are made to be worlds where those who can afford to go to it, they go to enjoy themselves rather than just to relax like at a garden world. At a pleasure world, there's gambling, great restaurants, professional courtesans and bed companions, and while yes, this is usually for the nobility, yet again, I need to specify there are locals, those who keep it all running, and who can also share in the fruits of the labor during their off time or their vacations. They are not worked to death like in some of the more harsher worlds. They are masters of their craft and are generally paid and respected as such. Sure, of course, there are exceptions. Maybe a pleasure girl was pressured into being one by an abusive father, but that's not the symptom of the planet itself, and it's usually a rarity. Generally, people who live on a pleasure world don't have a bad life. Now, to be fair, there are darker sides to all of these worlds. A civilized world can also have unrest like our world. A cult of Slaanesh can easily bear fruit on a pleasure world, and both garden worlds and civilized worlds can have chaos cults, or any of them can be invaded by demons or Xenos. However, that is a rare thing, and many of them have either never been attacked in 10,000 years, or were last attacked thousands of years ago, with no damage of said incursion remaining. Of course, these worlds also require ditch diggers and some part of the lower class, but they still live on worlds that are carefully curated to be paradise, and these lower class workers still have plenty of ways to find entertainment on their off time. The only real pain of living on a garden world or a pleasure world is accidentally pissing off the visiting nobility. Other than that, however, you're more likely to have an even better quality of life than you do on modern Earth, and that's just for the regular citizen. Of course, I'm not even mentioning agri-worlds or industrial worlds where someone's life is by no means guaranteed to be bad, even if there's plenty of work to do. However, if we just take how many civilized worlds, garden worlds, and pleasure worlds there are in the galaxy, that means there's tens of billions, maybe even hundreds of billions of men and women who have lives that can range from good to amazing. So next time a fandom tourist starts talking about how they would hate to be transported to the 40K universe, remember, while there is a real chance you can get fucked up, there's also not a small chance you'd be okay, and perhaps have an even better life than you do now. So keep that in mind. Alright everyone, that's all I have to say today on the subject. I hope you enjoyed it. Please like and comment if you think I deserved it, and sharing always helps. All my links are in the description below, and I will see you next time. Bye!